Hi, I'm Alister Benn, and in today's video I'm going to talk to you about the use of luminosity and contrast in quiet landscapes. In last week's video I asked everyone to submit questions, and I was so overwhelmed both on the channel and in the Facebook group and through private messages that it was just too many questions to cover in one video. So what I've decided to do is I'm going to address one question per video, and I'll be back tomorrow with another one. The first one I'm going to address, and if I can just dive into my phone here, is from Madeline Lana. Apologies Madeline if I pronounced your name wrong. What I want to ask is about quiet landscapes. Sometimes luminosity and contrast seems too loud. Thoughts on that? Now, what I don't want to be assumed is that high luminosity and contrast or high contrast are required in every single photograph we make. What I want to make clear is that every variation of luminosity and contrast has a consequence and an impact. Now, if we look into Lightroom here to this image here, what constitutes a quiet scene? The fact that we have an awful lot of fog in this photograph, taken in Yellow Mountain in eastern China. We've got a lot of fog, we've got some diffused pinnacles. There is some contrast, but if we look at the histogram here, we can see it's all kind of crunched up in the middle, and you would call this a low contrast scene at the moment. Now, if the image is quiet, we can choose to make it more quiet, so we can articulate its quietness, as it were. And how would we do that? Well, we can increase the luminosity, and increasing the luminosity instantly makes it lighter. And what are synonyms for lighter? Airy, ethereal, atmospheric. All of these words are emotional words that help us to describe the feelings and the emotions that we're wanting to express. Creativity relies upon us having a direction that we're wanting to express ourselves in. That's what creativity is. So what I've managed to do very quickly is to make this image lighter, more ethereal, in many ways quieter. So we've emphasized the quietness. If I take the contrast slider and drag it down, the image gets even more subdued and kind of quiet and ethereal. Other things I can do is I can have a look at my highlight slider, my white slider, and if I desaturate it a fraction more, it takes rid of that, a little bit of that color cast out of it as well. So everything I've done with this photograph has reduced contrast and made the image more expressive as a quiet scene. Should I choose to make a virtual copy of this and hold down my Option Alt key and reset it, if I want to suddenly start cranking up contrast, and I can do that by darkening the shadows, increasing the white point, I can increase contrast, I can reduce my blacks, and all of a sudden we start ending up with a very contrasty scene. This image has higher impact. It's still atmospheric, there's still a lot of fog, there's still the transitions that we've talked about in previous videos from detail into atmosphere and so forth, but it's lost some of that quiet nature. If I just compare those two photographs side by side, the one on the right is definitely a quieter representation. It has the details are subtle, subdued, quiet, and I probably prefer it. The one on the left, I kind of made it to show that a high contrast version of this scene may not be the way to go. We can do the opposite with this image here. We would say that this natively has high impact in that it is angular, graphic. We have pointy, jagged pinnacles of light and some nice contrast between the rocks and the vegetation. If I was to come in and just tidy up this a little bit to get rid of some of the distracting content, I think I'll just bring in that down there. This is a 3:2 vertical, which anyone will know I don't do very many of. Now, this already has some natively high contrast. You can see the black point there it's not super dark and the whites aren't super white, but we can very quickly make a very high contrast version of this photograph. And as we can see, we know where the luminosity is, and we have high contrast. We've got dark shadows, bright highlights. We can exaggerate this contrast further by coming into the HSL slider and increasing the luminosity of the greens, a little bit in the yellows. And what that's going to do is to make it more contrasty. We're adding luminosity to the yellows and the greens. Therefore, we're making those brighter and the image is overall getting more contrasty. So it wasn't a quiet scene necessarily to start with, because natively it was quite high contrast. However, I can take a virtual copy of this file and undo again a lot of those adjustments, and I can actually reduce contrast, open up my blacks, and I'm going to add a bit of clarity just to give it a bit more punch and make it a bit brighter. And now we have a version of the file that's very explicit. By evening out the luminosity and the contrast, we've actually created a version of this file that is softer, gentler, has less impact, and therefore has become quieter in a way. So I think it's really important, and I go into this in the book and the videos and so forth, is that luminosity and contrast are both tools that we can use to determine what we want to say, how we want to say it. And I think it's so important for us to listen to the scene, because if we look at these two versions, between the low contrast version and the high contrast version, they are different. Now, I could work this image on the right for a lot longer and balance it out an awful lot more in terms of the distribution of luminosity, but both of those files, the one on the left and the one on the right, are totally different. The content is the same, but it's the distribution of light, it's the distribution of contrast that changes how they feel. So hopefully it should be clear from these couple of examples that we've looked at that the scene somehow is telling us, am I high contrast or low contrast? Do I want to shout or do I want to whisper? And I think if we can start looking at our images as, are they a shouter or a whisperer, then that's a really good indication of the type of processing that we should be doing. So hopefully these two examples have been kind of useful for you. Hopefully you found this little mini tutorial useful. Tomorrow, tune in and I'll be looking at what's more important, foregrounds or backgrounds in landscape photography. If you found today's video useful, please consider buying my ebook, Luminosity and Contrast, or the videos, or both, where I go into all of these topics in great detail. I hope you found all this useful. If so, please click the subscribe button and give me a thumbs up, because that's always helpful. Thank you very much, and we'll see you tomorrow.